Imagine a mother with nearly infinite resources in a state of extreme grief. Her beloved son, the heir to a vast fortune and an ancient title, has vanished at sea, presumed dead for over a decade. But she refuses to believe it, and she spends years and a small fortune placing ads in newspapers across the globe, clinging to the desperate hope that he survived. Then, one day, a letter from a lawyer arrives from the Australian outback, and a man has come forward saying he's her long-lost son. He's coarse, unrefined, and enormously obese, bearing little resemblance to the slender, French-speaking aristocrat who disappeared. But he claims to be her son, and against all odds, she believes him. This isn't the plot of Netflix's latest Victorian period piece, at least not yet, but rather the true story of the Tichborne case. To understand the sheer audacity of the claim, we first have to understand the man whose identity was more than likely stolen. Sir Roger Charles Tichborne was the heir to one of England's great fortunes, as well as sprawling estates in Hampshire and elsewhere. Born in Paris in 1829 and raised by his French mother, Henriette, Roger grew up speaking English with a noticeable French accent. He wasn't a storybook prince. He was described as a slender, spoiled, and ill-educated young man, fond of heavy drinking and generally profane behavior. To give a sense of how much of a rebel this guy was, he was a 19th century high nobleman with a bunch of tattoos, a fact that shocked the sensibilities of contemporaries. As a young man, he fell deeply in love with his first cousin, Catherine Doughty, but the family opposed the match for somewhat obvious reasons. Heartbroken, Roger resigned his army commission, and he embarked on a grand tour of South America in 1853 to put some distance between himself and Catherine. In April 1854, the 25-year-old boarded a ship called the Bella in Rio de Janeiro. The ship and its passengers were never seen again. When wreckage was found off the Brazilian coast, Roger Tichborne was presumed dead. Running parallel to the life of the aristocratic heir was that of a man from the other end of the social spectrum. Arthur Orton was born in 1834 in Wapping, a rough-and-tumble district of London's docks, the son of a butcher who supplied ships' stores. His world couldn't have been more different from the Tichborne estates. After leaving school early, Orton went to sea, deserted his ship in Chile, and lived there for over a year, where he was befriended by a Chilean family. During his time with the family, he took on the name Tom Castro, an identity swap that would foreshadow what would happen next. After a brief return to London, he sailed for Australia in 1852. There, his life was a gritty colonial existence of a butcher, mail runner, and station hand, with persistent rumors of horse theft and other crimes shadowing his movements. By the mid-1860s, he was living in the remote Australian town of Wagga Wagga as a butcher named Thomas Castro, married to an illiterate woman and mired in debt. While seemingly random, Orton's life experiences inadvertently provided the perfect raw material for an incredible deception. The event that brought these two disparate worlds crashing together was a mother's refusal to give up hope. Lady Tichborne never accepted Roger's death. She was spurred on by rumors of shipwreck survivors in Australia and the pronouncements of a clairvoyant. Due to this, she began a relentless campaign of newspaper advertisements, offering a quote-unquote handsome reward for any information about her son. And if there was anyone who was able to pay out a big fat reward, it was Lady Tichborne. In 1865, a lawyer in Wagga Wagga, William Gibbs, saw the ad and connected it to his bankrupt client, Tom Castro. He encouraged Castro to make the claim, and soon, letters were on their way to England. From then on, this man of many names would often be known as the Tichborne claimant, or simply the claimant for short. The correspondence was riddled with errors. For instance, the claimant called his mother Hannah Francis and made mistakes about the family properties. But Lady Tichborne was undeterred. She sent money for his passage, and in January 1867, they met in Paris. Despite him speaking no French whatsoever, she immediately and unequivocally recognized the claimant as her son. Notably, the uncanny resemblance between the two men is one of the most mysterious aspects of this case, and long fueled the rumor that the claimant was perhaps an illegitimate child of the family. She granted him an income of £1,000 a year, giving his audacious claim the one thing it desperately needed: legitimacy. And as a quick aside, this is the equivalent of almost £200,000 per year at present in an allowance alone. He was also given residence in Tichborne Park, a sprawling country estate where he allegedly grew up. The claimant was given full access to all the luxuries of an estate owner during the time period. Basically think Downton Abbey, with a full array of servants. The income he was granted was, in essence, play money, so to speak, as he had no real expenses to speak of, with everything being covered by his alleged mother. Right from the very beginning, many people were extremely skeptical about the claimant. Skeptics felt that Lady Tichborne's grief didn't just lead her to find her son, it effectively recreated him, transforming a provincial con man into a national celebrity. The case exploded into a Victorian media sensation, captivating the public for the better part of a decade. Newspapers provided daily coverage, and the story became a form of national entertainment. The affair cleaved society in two, primarily along class lines: the establishment, the aristocracy, the government, and the legal profession was almost universally against the claimant. But the working classes rallied to his side, seeing him as a popular hero, a rough-hewn colonial underdog doing battle with a corrupt and snobbish elite. For them, it was less about belief in the fact that the claimant was actually Sir Roger. The fact that he was so obviously not Sir Roger was what brought so much joy to many of them. They were simply happy to see buffoonish aristocrats mauling over the presence of the claimant living in their midst, being forced to treat him as their equal. Well, that was at least while Lady Tichborne was alive and providing him protection. When she passed away, the whole case would heat up big time. After Lady Tichborne died in 1868, the claimant's main source of funding vanished. In a stroke of genius, his supporters launched an innovative crowdfunding scheme known as Tichborne Bonds. These bonds were sold to the public, guaranteeing a payout of £100 if the claimant won his inheritance. The scheme was a wild success, raising an astonishing £40,000 and demonstrating the incredible depth of his popular support. To put it in context, this is well over £6 million today. People weren't just following a story, they were literally investing in a man's identity, turning his claim into a speculative asset on the stock market of public opinion. Unfortunately for early investors, this was basically the 19th century version of a cryptocurrency rug pull. I'm sure the 19th century version of CoffeeZilla was all over him for this. The first great legal battle began in May 1871. The civil trial, ostensibly an action to eject him as a tenant from Tichborne Park, was in reality a trial of identity. The claimant's case rested almost entirely on personal recognition. Over 100 witnesses, former soldiers, servants, and associates, swore that he was Roger Tichborne. He seemed to recall intimate details from Roger's past, like the name of a pet dog, which lent his story an air of credibility. Further, the claimant seemed fairly well versed in Catholic tradition, and while Sir Roger perhaps wasn't the most devout Catholic, he absolutely grew up immersed in the tradition. This was later explained by the fact that the claimant's wife was indeed Catholic, and that he had apparently converted while in Australia. But his case crumbled during 22 grueling days of cross-examination. Under the piercing questions of the family's lawyer, his ignorance was laid bare. He couldn't speak or understand a word of French, Sir Roger's childhood language, which the real man spoke at a native level. In fact, the real Roger was said to have spoken French much more proficiently than he did English. Notably, the claimant also knew nothing about Stonyhurst, the elite school Roger had attended, and where he spent many of his formative years. He was also unable to properly identify his friends from this time, a fact that was considered to be virtually inconceivable for someone of his class. These connections made at these elite private schools didn't simply vanish, and the real Sir Roger had maintained close ties to his old boys network up until he disappeared. Simply put, this wasn't just a case of not remembering some kids he went to school with. This was more akin to not remembering members of your lifelong social circle. He couldn't even recognize his own mother's handwriting, and had no memory of a sealed package Roger had left with a servant before his fateful voyage. Further, despite being a 19th century nobleman, Roger had tattoos, while the claimant didn't, and trust me, there was no tattoo removal available at the time. A big part of the case against the claimant was how morbidly obese the claimant was. Roger was known to be slender, while the claimant was 400 pounds, a weight almost unheard of in this era. Notably, extensive weight was placed on this fact, despite this being objectively one of the least fishy things about his case. The real Roger Tichborne could indeed have become old and obese, especially given his excessive lifestyle and extreme indulgence in food and drink. Ultimately, given the weight of the evidence against him, the claimant was evicted from Tichborne Park, but the worst for him was yet to come. The second trial, a criminal matter which began in April 1873, was even more epic, lasting 188 days and becoming one of the longest in English history. The goal now wasn't just to disprove the Tichborne identity, but to affirmatively prove the Orton identity. The prosecution brought forward 215 witnesses. People from Wapping identified the claimant as their old neighbor, whom some identified as Arthur Orton. Evidence emerged that upon his arrival in England, the claimant had made a suspicious trip to Wapping to ask about the status of the Orton family. Handwriting experts also testified that his script matched Orton's, not Tichborne's, though I have to question the legitimacy of such expert testimony. Handwriting analysis isn't an exact science even today, and I strongly suspect the 19th century version of it was even more questionable. The defense staked its hopes on a dramatic surprise witness, a Danish sailor who claimed to have been on the ship that rescued the Bella's survivors. But the prosecution quickly exposed this Danish sailor as a recently released convict who had previous convictions for perjury, and his testimony backfired catastrophically. After 188 days of testimony, the jury took less than half an hour to find the claimant guilty. They declared he was not Roger Tichborne, he was Arthur Orton, and sentenced him to 14 years of hard labor for perjury. Interestingly, the last convicts were shipped off to Australia in the 1860s, so Arthur just missed the cutoff for an all-expenses-paid cruise back to his adopted homeland. Also, just as a quick aside, this may have been the worst jury to serve on in history, as the jurors were paid the equivalent of about £10 per day in present-day currency. After serving 10 years, the man the law now called Arthur Orton was released from prison in 1884. The popular movement that had once hailed him as a hero had fizzled out. He tried to cash in on his fame on the music hall circuit, regaling people with the stories of his time as Sir Roger, but interest had waned significantly while he was locked up. In 1895, living in poverty, he accepted money from a newspaper to publish a confession that he was indeed Arthur Orton, only to retract it almost immediately. He died destitute on April 1st, 1898. In a final baffling twist, the Tichborne family, who had spent a fortune to expose him as a fraud, either provided or explicitly allowed a plate to be placed on his coffin bearing a certain name. That plate bore the name Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne, providing proof in the eyes of his sympathizers that the claimant may not have been Arthur Orton after all. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like and subscribe and to share this video. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon or the YouTube membership to support my work further. There's also my Instagram, which I just post silly stuff on. So if you're into that sort of thing, check out that link in the description as well. Imagine standing in a grand plaza of Pyongyang, gazing up at a towering bronze statue of a man who looms larger than life. Crowds of North Koreans approach in neat lines, carrying flowers and prostrating themselves at the statue's feet. Children nearby sing hymns of praise to this leader as if reciting prayers. Scenes like this, at once real and surreal, capture the cult of personality that has long surrounded Kim Il-sung, the founding leader of North Korea. His portrait hangs in every home. His titles include Great Leader and Son of the Nation, and even decades after his death, he remains North Korea's eternal president. Kim Il-sung was born in 1912 and was the architect of North Korea and its supreme ruler from 1948 until his death in 1994. In 1953, after the close of the war on the peninsula, he purged all dissenters from his ranks and consolidated his position as the great leader of North Korea. By the 1960s, everyday life in North Korea was dedicated to glorifying the great leader. Kim fashioned not just a regime, but a political religion centered on himself, ensuring he ruled unchallenged for 46 years and establishing a family dynasty that continues today. From the beginning of his tightening on the reins of power in the 1950s, propaganda and iconography have pervaded daily life. Giant portraits of Kim Il-sung adorned public buildings, and statues of him rose in every city and town. By one count, North Korea built around 80 large statues of Kim Il-sung and over 20,000 smaller ones nationwide, a density of monuments that reinforced his omnipresence. The most iconic is the massive bronze statue at the Mansudae Grand Monument in Pyongyang, where citizens are expected to bow and lay flowers in homage. Reverence for Kim is inculcated from childhood. Kindergarteners learn songs praising Father Kim Il-sung from their first day of school. In nursery schools, toddlers bow to Kim's portrait and thanked him for their snacks, literally saying, "Thank you, Father," as if he personally provided the food. These early rituals instilled a belief that all blessings flowed from the leader. People are taught to believe that Kim Il-sung was capable of virtually superhuman feats. While he was a real leader against the Japanese, he's generally credited as being the sole organizing force of this partisan effort, according to the official state narrative. On the intellectual side of things, Kim Il-sung is credited with writing over 10,000 books and speeches, entirely by himself. Notably, while it's true that he does have over 10,000 works officially attributed to him by the North Korean state, it's likely that he had a bit of assistance along the way. North Korea has often been likened to an extreme religious cult, with Kim Il-sung at its center as a divine figure. Many North Koreans indeed came to revere their leader with a faith-like fervor. One defector recalled that as a child, he believed Kim Il-sung and his family were so perfect that they didn't even need to use the bathroom. The reasoning for this isn't that using the bathroom can be a bit dirty, but rather Their bodies could so perfectly process nutrients that there was no waste left over to produce. When Kim Il sung died in 1994, the depth of adulation became starkly evident. The nation plunged into an elaborate, state-orchestrated mourning. Crowds of distraught citizens wailed in the streets, perhaps out of fear of reprisal if they didn't, or perhaps out of genuine concern for their beloved leader. After all, these people had for generations come to believe that absolutely everything they have is the result of Kim Il sung's benevolence. And it's not like these North Koreans could look to their grandparents and ask what it was like to live a free life. Their grandparents had lived under brutal Japanese occupation, where the Korean people were subject to horrors beyond comprehension. To give just one example, thousands of Koreans were subject to disturbing human experimentation by Imperial Japan, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Kim Il sung was posthumously declared eternal president, and his embalmed body now lies preserved in a mausoleum where citizens still bow before him as if venerating a sacred relic. In every sense, Kim Il sung was, and remains, enshrined at the center of his nation's life. Several factors help explain how this all-encompassing cult of personality took root and endured in North Korea, though none fully explain the phenomenon. First, there was political necessity. In the early Cold War years, North Korea was a new state forged from colonial rule and devastated by conflict. Kim Il sung's regime needed to unite the populace and legitimize its rule. A personality cult proved to be a powerful tool for concentrating loyalty and authority in Kim alone. By enforcing total loyalty and subjugation to the great leader, the regime erased dissent and alternative centers of influence. Praising Kim became synonymous with patriotism and unity. Foreign influences played a role as well, providing some guidance for this new leader. Kim's cult of personality drew from Soviet and Chinese models, but he pushed them even further. Neither the Soviet or the Chinese leadership were ever so completely subservient to one individual as the North Koreans were to Kim Il sung. Equally important was Korean cultural tradition, particularly the Confucian ethos of filial piety and loyalty to authority. North Korean propaganda reframed these traditions to its advantage by presenting Kim Il sung as the benevolent father of the nation. In a society steeped in Confucian values, obedience to a father figure leader felt like a natural moral duty. The importance of family, a core Confucian value, was woven into the political ideology, merging with socialist collectivism and the Kim cult itself. Of course, China is the originator of these traditions, and it naturally begs the question why China, which started with a similar regime, didn't follow the same path. This is likely because the Chinese communists largely discarded tradition and tried to create a new order. Finally, psychological manipulation and isolation ensured the cult's persistence. From childhood onward, North Koreans have heard only one narrative, that Kim Il sung is the source of all good and the defender against every threat. With strict censorship blocking outside information, this singular narrative became deeply ingrained. Over time, the propaganda took on a spiritual fervor. Analysts note that the Kim cult exhibits distinctly religious characteristics, with intensely held beliefs and rituals treating the leader's mythic status as gospel truth. This indoctrination was enforced by fear as well. Anyone caught doubting or criticizing the official narrative faced severe punishment. In essence, to speak out against Kim Il sung isn't voicing a political difference. It's the equivalent of spreading heresy in a theocratic absolute monarchy. It's an insult to both a divine authority and to the temporal order. Kim Il sung's cult of personality has outlived the man himself. Even today, his smiling portrait still gazes down over Pyongyang's main square, and school children continue to learn patriotic songs and stories celebrating his exploits. The Kim Il sung cult became the template for his successors, his son Kim Jong il and grandson Kim Jong un, each wrapping themselves in the founder's aura. While these two men have been portrayed as godlike in their own right, they're ultimately portrayed as such because of their connection to Kim Il sung. I should also mention that studying the North Korean regime is extremely difficult due to the closed nature of the society. As such, our researchers can't just consult direct evidence on how or why the North Korean state chose to develop such an extreme cult of personality. In the end, why North Korea developed the cult of personality that it did remains an unsolved mystery that will be studied for generations to come. In the meantime, us outsiders will continue to watch North Korea with fascination as we observe a society that has increasingly become entirely unmoored from reality. Hidden beneath the peaceful greenery of Los Angeles' Elysian Park lies the legend of a buried fortune. This nearly 600-acre urban oasis, the city's oldest park, is rumored to conceal gold and jewels hidden away during turbulent times in the 19th century. It's a surprising setting for such a tale, not a remote jungle or pirate-infested island, but a public park near downtown Los Angeles. According to the lore, wealthy residents of the old town stashed their riches in these hills to protect them from an invading army. It sounds like the stuff of movies, but for over almost 2 centuries the tale has persisted, partly because it indeed has a historical basis. The legend's origin dates back to the Mexican-American conflict of the 1840s, when U.S. forces invaded California. As American troops neared Los Angeles in 1846, panic spread among the well-to-do families, who feared looting. Some of these wealthy families allegedly hid their gold, coins, and jewelry in what is now Elysian Park's rugged canyons. The remote ravines just outside the town offered convenient hiding spots, close enough to retrieve later, but far enough from soldiers' eyes. In reality, the war ended relatively quickly, and American occupation of Los Angeles didn't result in the widespread looting residents had feared. Many families likely dug up their treasure once the danger passed. But perhaps not all. Some who buried their wealth never returned, meaning their caches stayed in the ground. This possibility of unrecovered riches left behind is the spark that keeps the treasure legend alive. As early as 1896, newspapers were already reporting on adventurous souls digging for hidden riches in Elysian Park. Those early treasure seekers found nothing verifiable, but the legend persisted and gained new life in the late 20th century. By the 1980s, modern treasure hunters were on the case. They discovered a boulder with man-made holes and signs of an old tunnel nearby. Digging about 30 feet into a hillside, this team unearthed only a 1940s-era lantern battery and a length of frayed rope. This evidence indicated that someone had potentially beat them to the loot, but was confirmation that there were undocumented treasure hunts in the area previously. Though this expedition came up empty-handed, the team considered this proof that treasure had indeed been buried and had already been removed. Whether it was removed by the wealthy families back in the 1840s or by treasure hunters subsequently couldn't be said with any certainty. Despite the lack of concrete findings, the Elysian Park treasure remains a source of fascination. Most historians agree that the goods were mostly retrieved by their original owners once things had settled down. However, it does remain a possibility that some treasure was lost and covertly discovered in the last 2 centuries. Officially, no treasure has ever been discovered in the Elysian Park, but this hasn't stopped treasure seekers before, and likely won't stop them in the future.